Good morning, Nigeria, and welcome to Daybreak, reaching you live from the nation's capital in Abuja. My name is Ayuba Ilya. Thank you for joining us this morning. And if this is your first time, this is the show you want to watch every morning on weekdays, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m.
Yes, indeed. Good morning, Nigeria. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is indeed a beautiful day, and we're excited to be here. We'll be here from right now, yes, right about now, up until 9 a.m.
And of course, packed with a lot of things to talk about, issues of national concern. And we also have stories that made the headlines to be reviewed by the Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper, Sunday Michael, in the studio. And we'll also be talking about something that for us in this profession is very, very crucial, which is talking about brown envelope journalism. It's something that for us is a major concern, and for, to the larger society as well. And so we'll be joined by seasoned journalists to talk about this. And of course, we'll be shining light on also some economical issues. There is this story about
project duplication.
Yeah, to the tune of 20 billion naira, as uncovered by the ICPC. And then we'll be having that discussion on the program today.
Yes, but before we do that, let's find out what happened today in history. All right, so taking a look at what happened today, 8th December in history. In 1542, Mary, Queen of Scots, was born, and 6 days later, she became Queen of Scotland. Imagine a 6-day-old becoming Queen of Scotland.
Very interesting.
All right.
I can't imagine, but I mean, I think that's more symbolic.
How?
I mean, at that age, what do you expect?
Exactly.
A 6-year-old child to do? Really, it's just for.
Okay, it's one thing if you grow and you're groomed to become queen and everything, but at six days, not 6 years, 6 days. What do you know? 6 days. Yes, 6 days. 6 days after she was born.
Wow. Well, I don't know how to deal with that.
All right. In 1987, U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev signed a nuclear weapons reduction treaty. In 2012, Pakistan's president visited a British hospital where a 15-year-old schoolgirl, Malala Yousafzai, was being treated after being shot in the head by a Taliban gunman in October. Now, this particular story of Malala actually, made a lot of waves back then.
The whole world.
Yes, and it made her who she is today. But before we go into that, let's take the last one, which is in 2016. China declared its first ever red smog alert as poisonous air quality forced the government to close down schools, order motorists off the road, and shut down factories in and around Beijing.
Well, very interesting there. For me, I think the most interesting fact there that we see is the incident of the Malala girl. I would say that that incident instead made her a hero of some sort, a heroine, or whichever way you want to call it, you know,
it
because of that experience.
Way, yeah.
Of that experience, it was intended to kill her or silence her, but in the end, she became more
outspoken,
vocal,
yes,
you know, about what she believes in, which is about, you know, girl-child education, you know, girl-child rights, and all of that. Until today, she stands as a symbol, you know, of that, you know, I would say liberation. For many girls, she becomes an inspiration for many, and the world over, she's recognized, you know, for that.
You know, it would have actually gone sideways, you know, leading to her death or something. But I think, you know, she had a purpose, and she is living up to that particular purpose. And you can see, you know, nations, you know, just being in tune with everything she says, and she's still standing firm on what she believes in, which is a good one.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue to have this kind of facts, you know, in our history every day on the program. We call it Today in History. So I'm sure you might have picked one or two things, you know, from this very segment. For now, let's take a quick breather, and then after that, we'll be taking a look at the stories that made the headlines on our newspapers this morning. And like I told you, we have Sunday Michael, Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper, to give us perspectives on the stories. Please stay with us.
But in a situation where you find that they look at the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that.
All right, thank you for staying with us. Now let's head straight into the papers today. Now we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspapers, and there you'd see the first story talks about truck crushes 15 students to death in Lagos. That's on page 8 of the Daily Trust newspaper. The next story there talks about COVID-19. FG says 100 million Nigerians will be in poverty by 2022. So that's a total contradiction of the plan to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty, you may say. And you'd find details of that story on page 4. I don't know. We will continue to hope that we get over this COVID, because just when we thought we're, you know, getting over it, another variant comes up. And this time around we're talking about Omicron variant, and we're already beginning to see the impact of that on the global economy as some countries begin to you know, place restrictions, travel restrictions in and out of their own country. The lead story talks about bandits stranded, make peace with communities. The writer says, order ceasefire, allow harvest. Dry season makes them vulnerable. Many killed in NAF airstrikes in Zamfara, Kaduna. Fresh emissary visits warlord Tuji. And then you also see the lead story there showing you the scene of pandemonium yesterday in Lagos, where some 15 students were said to have been, you know, killed in an accident by a truck. Also beside that, you'd see concerns as money lenders breach data protection law. You'd find details of that on page 30. I met Tinubu with consent of other G7 members. That's according to Shekarau, the APC crisis in Kano State. You'd find details of that on page 31. Cultists beheads man over spiritual torment. And that's on page 25 of Daily Trust. At the bottom, the last story there talks about travel ban. Diplomatic row likely. National Assembly warns UK. And then you see the writers there. Governors want Nigeria removed from red list. We will review our decision December 20th, and that's according to the British government. 3 fresh Omicron cases detected in Nigeria. That's all of that on page 4 of the newspaper. But I wonder, I mean, we keep crying foul, and yet we allow British citizens come into the country. I mean, others are advocating for some kind of reciprocity.
Exactly, what's stopping us from shutting down our, you know, borders as well? Nothing.
I mean, but the federal government has said that we are not going to take that decision. Perhaps we are more vulnerable, in that sense, if we take that decision. But hey, I mean, we have to show some guts here.
Okay. All right. The next paper we will be taking a look at is the Guardian newspaper. And we have a story here that says Omicron. AU governors, lawmakers call for end to travel ban stigmatization. And you can find details of that story on page 2. We have another one which says U.S. urges federal government telecoms operators to prioritize security of 5G network. And that particular story can be found on page 5 as well. And the lead story here says currency risks. Delayed counterpart fund, insecurity, slow infracos take off. And we have writers here that says, despite mere 2.5 million license, 20-year tenure, Mbata claims counterpart fund is too low, economic viable areas. We also have 90% broadband population coverage target to 2025 not realistic, and challenges in InfraCo's multifaceted, and it says a 10-year law. And at the bottom there you'd find a story that says crisis in power sector as Buhari sacks AEDC management. And details of that story can be found on page 3. Lagos issues strict guidelines for social events at Yuletide. And you can find that story at on page 3, I beg your pardon. ECOWAS ministers propose reopening of land borders next month on page 4. And then on page 5, bandits invade Kaduna, Niger communities, kidnap 36. And right at the footnote, we have a story making rounds all over the media. Darwin College, key suspects in police nets as parents hold candlelight for Oromoni. And you can find details of that particular story on page 8. These are all the stories we have on the Guardian newspaper.
All right, now let's take a look at the Nation newspaper today. The first story there talks about $419 million Paris Club debt. Order stopping deduction of states fund says. You'd see what we discussed with Tinubu by Shekarau. You'd find details of that. And then the next story, court orders reinstatement of dismissed general. Police interrogate 5 Dowen College pupils. And then you would also find the lead story talks about outrage as truck crushes pupils to death in Lagos. Conflicting casualty figures. Protesters burn truck, vandalized VIO vehicle, and then you'd also find at the very bottom, 5 die in Kwara crash, pastor's house burnt over missing child. And that's these are the stories that made the headlines on the Nation newspaper today.
All right, we'll move on to Punch newspaper, and it says, a story here right at the top says, NIMC battles high maintenance costs, obsolete computers, poor connectivity. And details of that story can be found on page 21. $197 million 5G mock auction holds Friday. Rollout begins 2022 in 12 states. We also have Southwest governors working on arms for Amotekun operatives, and says Makinde. Details of that story can be found on page 7 of the Punch newspaper. National Assembly, NGF, fault UK travel ban, demand reversal. And you can find that story on page 2. The lead story here says, federal government, MDAs bar unvaccinated visitors, Lagos to demand jab cards at parties. And we have leads here that say, security agents reject identification card from contractors. Others insist on vaccination cards. Social gathering attendees must produce vaccination cards. Orders Lagos threatens prosecution. And then Disease Control Center detects 3 more Omicron cases. COVID-19 variant infections rise to 6. And right at the bottom, you have a story here on page 4 that says, Uni Lauren mourns as crash claims man, wife, children, and student. And these are the stories we can take on Punch newspaper.
Oh, all right. Well, let's get perspectives on these stories now. Like we told you, we have Sunday Markel in the studio, the Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust. Good morning and welcome to the program again.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, some stories that dominate the papers today. The tragic incident in Lagos is one of those. About 15 students are said to have been killed as a result of an accident, by a truck. It's like for the past few days, it's been from one tragic story to another, all coming from Lagos. First is about the Dowen College child who was killed, and now we had about some 8 children that died in a vehicle that was parked and locked themselves inside, and now this one. How would you react to this particular one?
I had the same reaction as you when those stories filtered in. I was just imagining, would we have one day where you wake up in the morning and go through the dailies and there is really no negative story? Because these things have a way of dampening your day. Waking up to such colossal loss. It's crazy. Not a natural disaster of some sort, and that huge number of persons, losing that huge number of lives to reckless driving, to incidences that can be avoided and all that. So it's dampening to say the least. You would think that for a country like us, that battles all kinds of circumstances, that we will do everything possible to minimize those ones that are mere human errors, at least to keep the number of negative events at the barest minimum. But what can we do? These things happen.
So on one hand, we're hearing that eyewitnesses are saying that the accident happened as a result of the truck driver trying to, escape officials of the LASMA, for breaking traffic laws. And on the other hand, we're also hearing VIA officials saying no, that it happened as a result of brake failure. Now, these students were waiting at a bus stop after school, and then he ran into them and all of that. We seem not to have accurate,
I am
position.
very familiar with where these incidents happen. As a matter of fact, it's 300, 400, 500 meters away from the Daily Trust Lagos office. So I'm very familiar with the route. So coming in from the Ojogdu axis to Ogba, or diverting into Agidingbi, is a very narrow dual carriageway. And on that road, you have the VIO office, you have the road safety office, you have a police station before you get into Ogba, which is a popular suburb. So what happens is regularly, these guys come out of their office and mount all kinds of roadblocks. Because this is a truck, there is the likelihood, because there is a subsisting order in Lagos where reticulated vehicles are not supposed to be on the road between a certain period and a certain period. Apparently, this person was trying to make a quick dash into that suburb of Ogba. At the time, trucks were probably not allowed on the road. And usually when that happens, all kinds of agencies of government will want to pounce on it, because it becomes an easy prey because you have clearly broken the law. So there would be some sense if some of the arguments indeed that he was trying to run away from each of them, because they indeed have offices on that axis. Their offices are less than 200, 300 meters away from the Fafunwa College, where the purported students were waiting at the bus stop. So because these institutions are on that road, there is that likelihood. Then you begin to wonder, where have they carried out any kind of examination to tell whether it was a brake failure of some sort? Because the narrative that we have read chronicled the event as immediately after it happened, the driver took off and headed towards the police station in Ogba and ran into the police station where he took cover. And because the mob could not reach him, they set the vehicle on fire. So where did they carry out the evaluation of a failed brake? Is it on the burnt vehicle, or simply on the testimony of the arrested driver? So these are conflicting details that perhaps a proper investigation or forensic investigation would have to unravel.
Okay, so if the mob had actually, caught up with the man, that's the driver, only God knows what would have happened
Absolutely.
to him. What does that say about jungle justice in Nigeria?
It's to be fair, it's not a Nigerian thing, especially when you have shown such recklessness as. Let us even take it that it was a brake failure. It happens. These are mechanical faults. There is really nothing you could do about it. What then do you do? Immediately the incident happened. If it was a brake failure, how did he stop the vehicle and recontrolled it back into the road and headed for a police station? And how did he stop at the front of the police station to take cover? Do you see how the logic is inconsistent? So there is nothing that aches a mob so much as an event happens and the next thing they notice is the attempt by the driver to want to escape. Yeah, there is also the danger of staying there because an irate mob, seeing this, especially when blood is involved and life is involved, they can descend on
the
you.
nature of Lagos, the way
but for a reticulated vehicle like that, for the kind of road I described to you, if you attempt to take off from that scene, you are more likely to cause more death than the one you have caused, because the roads are never free. If it is about the time those students had closed from school, it's about the time civil servant would have closed from the secretariat, which is within the same radius. Then it means the roads are crowded. And how would you maneuver? Even a bike would not find it very easy to do a 40-50 kilometer per hour on that stretch at that time, let alone a reticulated vehicle. So you can imagine what danger he was causing by attempting to flee that place. As a matter of fact, very close to the Fafunwa College, to also puncture the arguments in the public domain, is another police station. But he didn't get into the Fafunwa police station, the police station next to the Fafunwa College. He drove all the way to Ogba. That leaves a lot of room for speculation.
But with the presence of these security officers around that place like that, wouldn't they have been able to control the crowd or the mob, against any form of, jungle justice that may take place there? So painfully, what you get with the Nigerian system is whatever doesn't readily brings money to those guys on the road, they don't care. And I'll give you an instance. So you will see a vehicle broken down after a road safety checkpoint. Nobody's attending to it. And that's a broken down vehicle. That's the driver's problem. Let him sort himself. Even though that broken vehicle would start, causing traffic. That's not their business. They are interested in whose license is not consistent or who apparently has some fault with the cars where they can immediately pounce on. You see that oftentimes. You see a police checkpoint and there is an incident. There are two drivers who had attempted to crash into each other, almost fighting on the road, and these guys don't care. So with all of those agencies there, you would have also thought that there would be some kind of coordination. Let us do an interagency thing rather than have 2 or 3 multiple checkpoints on a road where movement is already difficult. Rather than have road safety here, and when you raise your head up within 100 meters, you see a VIO a checkpoint. Why not we have a common joint task force, that comes out and mount a place, and once they pick you up, depending on what your issues are, they direct you to the appropriate agency and allow traffic to flow. Because I see what they do on the road as pure economic sabotage. Half the times the people you punish are people who have even complied. You have stopped them from getting to their business places, closing deals early, or even merely rushing a ward to a hospital who deserve immediate medical attention. So all kinds of things need to be reviewed with regards to how our multi-agencies, seem to take advantage of the road. Just before we leave this issue here, another thing of concern to me is that we hear about, gas explosion, by trucks conveying PMS and gas and the rest of them, and so a lot of accidents are associated with these trucks. Is it that there is no specific time of movement for these trucks, and shouldn't we be thinking around that? I mean, if there isn't.
In fairness to the Lagos State government, for a number of years now, there had been attempts to control truck movements in Lagos. As a matter of fact, like I did mention, I think anytime from 6 a.m. you are not allowed on the road. You're supposed to have parked somewhere at on the exit, at the entry point into the city. And if you're already in the city, you can't go out until sometimes in the evening, where to allow for easy movement of people who need to go to work and back. And in fairness, again, to Lagos State, it has a fairly small landmarks. It's more of a water body than
and then
landmarks. So there are really no alternatives, other than the available routes. So those things have been there. But what we have seen are deliberate attempts by some persons to disregard these orders. And in other cases, they are trucks that are conveying essentials. I'll give you an instance. So the trucks that carry out distribution of Coca-Cola or other, basically, rather than running promotions for them, carbonated drinks, necessarily have to move by day to convey these drinks to the various points where people off-take. The trucks that are designed to collect waste have to move by day, because Lagos has so much density that it generates waste per second. You can't wait for a Saturday and Sunday to do waste evacuation. Those vehicles involve a big wide body trucks. They necessarily have to move, and most times, because they are not in very good conditions, they also break down and cause big issues, right? Then you have wide body vehicles that are either serving as staff buses to various companies, or even school buses to school, that necessarily have to move. So each of these class of vehicles can cause a lot of problem once they break down on the road. The other thing is, once this breakdown happens, even to get the rescue vehicles to that scene to evacuate, it's a massive, massive, massive problem. The third one are the category of people who flagrantly disregard these rules, likely because they are probably owned by the federal government or another government agency who sees itself as an equal authority in the state, and sees itself as bigger than the state's authorities to control, running foul of those laws, or merely getting even policemen from other divisions to break the law. What they do is they come into the fringes of Lagos and pay one or two policemen who jump on the truck and start telling their colleagues on the road, they clear this one, it's unessential. So you get all kinds of mess, to complicate the situation.
But we've also seen instances where traffic officials don't handle vehicle owners well. You find them climbing their vehicles while the vehicle is on the move,
fact,
or entering forcefully entering these vehicles. Shouldn't there be some kind of reorientation for these officials?
With the benefit of hindsight, what happened in Lagos prior to recently was the kind of people that were recruited into that traffic agency was a problem of its own. So we woke up, had thugs who were used to harassing people on the way, and say, okay, we want to create jobs. And because they are already used to harassing people on traffic, we can simply just sew a uniform and put on them and that converts them. So there was so much difficulty trying to get them to shift away from what used to be thuggery to now what is supposed to be a civil way of administering, carrying out this work to enable. Remember, the final objective is to enable for ease of flow of traffic. But these guys don't understand it that way. The motivation for them is about how much they get at the end of the day. So in an attempt to stop a driver, they can shut down an entire city. You get that kind of attitude, and for how much? Really. So at other times, they've been killed several times trying to do these things. At other times, the driver just throw out monies out of the window, and without properly looking, they want to get at the 1,500 naira, and another incoming vehicle just smashes them off. It's crazy, the kind of things they do, male and female alike. And you will be shocked when you see some of those videos. They jump on the windshield and while the vehicle is on motion. Even, what do you think can be the worst penalty for that car? Maybe the government would impound the vehicle. Is it worth your life? So it tells you, if you had proper orientation and value for your life, and you understand the extent of the risks then you will not see some of these things, because all you basically have to do is, in Lagos, as long as it's a work period, there is a limit to how far you can run. If you escape this place, there is a traffic waiting for you in front. Why not you basically feed your counterpart with the particulars of that vehicle in front, and he runs into the traffic and he's just gently taking a no. But if that vehicle goes out of his own radar, it means whatever will come in as a good job will definitely not end in his own pocket. So the motivation is terrible.
And then quickly, let's also look at the fitness, the roadworthiness of some of these trucks, that ply our roads every day. I mean, if we hear, say, for instance, about brake failure, I mean, that would be expected from a truck that has been on the road for decades.
God knows how long, yeah.
And then some of them, when you are, especially if you are driving behind some of these trucks, sometimes you really, they bring out all sort of smokes, very, very dangerous smokes, and people are, are held to ransom. You inhale it and all of that. How can we ensure sanity in that?
Sanity essentially would happen with enforcement. The laws are there. The agencies also exist. It's a question of people waking up to their responsibility. Because all I see on the road is an attempt to bully people who mostly are in compliance. So if they stop you and you have a driver's license, then you start seeing this deliberate attempt to search for things, that are way off the mark. You are not even able to tell what is the jurisdiction of the VIO man from the road safety man, from the police guy who shows up on the road, and then from state agencies like LASMA. And I say this because if we were worried about roadworthiness, sometimes you don't even need to inspect vehicles to tell that they are unworthy of being on the road. And look at the kind of excuse that were given by the head of LASMA in his last interview that was in the public domain, that attempting to bring those bus drivers and whatever they call them drivers to book would disrupt traffic flow. And so because you cannot contain people who are perpetually a menace on your road, you leave them to have a field day and face people who naturally make attempts to comply. It's amazing how we work. So the way the system works is, you guys have so much trouble. Please, you can have your day. This Usaina looks like a gentle lady. Let us give her more trouble. That's how the system works. And so what the sane people like Usaina are beginning to do is to say, it appears this other guy is getting away with the madness. Let me put on the toga of a mad lady too. So maybe that will allow me get. So we incentivize people who do the wrongs and punish people who attempt to live right. And so what is happening is, people understand this psychology, they move away from being sane to being unsane and increase the situation on the road. So if they are willing to carry out proper, if they are willing to discharge their responsibilities properly, then we can start stopping these people. It doesn't matter how long. In other countries, if you become a repeat offender, they will impound your vehicles and seize your license and stop you from driving. We don't see those kind of things here. In other places, they will even crush the vehicle. They will give you punishments that would deter other people from doing it. But until we scale up to that level, we can't stop the madness that is ongoing.
All right, now let's move to another story, and we're going to merge two stories on the front page of Daily Trust. The first one that says COVID-19. Federal government says 109 million Nigerians will be in poverty in 2022, and also about the travel ban, and the story here saying a diplomatic role likely, and the National Assembly won in the UK.
Two interesting stories, two interesting contrasts, and I have two perspectives to the story. The first perspective is, the first thing that hits me is, I said, I hope these guys are not coming up with an excuse not to pull 100 billion out of poverty, right? Because it's already made excuse, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, we would have done A, B, C, and X, Y, Z, but because this happened, we were unable to do it. So now you understand that it was not a failure of trial, it was just that we were not, that's one way of looking at it. The other way is the serious one, is the fact that COVID-19 is indeed a major disruption on the world order. Worse still for a country like Nigeria, where you have to depend almost exclusively on global supply chains for even small factories in Nigeria to function. So that makes sense. If the factories cannot function, it means they cannot employ people. It means it will worsen what is even a terrible pay from those factories. If we are unable to export oil because factories globally are shutting down because they are taking restrictions in their home country against a resurgence of the COVID, it means we cannot earn money, and it means the state governments, about 30 of them or more, that are exclusively dependent on federal allocations to survive and pay salaries, would not be able to keep pace with their allocation. It means more households will not be able to survive, and it means even the economic activity that is engendered by salaries, whenever salaries are paid, the markets become busy, activities around those days all of those will be affected. And quite frankly, you can begin to understand where that 100 million or so would get into that. So it's both a serious thing, and on the other hand, like I said, for the travel ban, like I said, I also have two perspectives. One of them is, what are these people saying? All of their kids are in London. All of their holiday destinations in London. This is a very critical time for them, where they either have to go to London or the kids have to come back home. So this is a distraction for their lifestyle. Very soon you hear the National Assembly say, we are going on 3 weeks recess. In that 3 weeks recess, 24 hours later, all the flights leading to London are booked, fully booked. So you begin to wonder, their hospitals, the checkups they do are there. They have to show up in Oxford Circus to do some shoppings. So London is like an extension of Nigeria, if you like, for the elite. And so it really hits close home, when pronouncements like that come in. And you are seeing threats from everywhere, Governors Forum, from the National Assembly, from the federal government. And then you begin to wonder, say, now, if this was coming from Cotonou or Benin Republic, whether we are going to say proportionate. So it has to be London to elicit that kind of response. But frankly, also looking at the other side, it is fair to respond in this manner. In fact, we called it a travel appetite, right? Because we are seeing more cases of the Omicron in Europe than we have seen in Nigeria or South Africa. Why are they also not extending the bans to the European countries? There is a fair argument also coming out from the Senate to say, we have done fairly well. In fairness, we have responded even more seriously than we had with other issues in the time past. People have taken the question of public sector serious in this country for the first time in a long time. I mean, you see people, my 5-year-old was going to school the last time and they forgot to put on his nose mask. And he was telling the auntie, you want me to go to school and come back with coronavirus and you're not giving me nose mask. It tells you the level of consciousness that has synced in this country as a result of efforts of people like you who have continued to put these issues on the top burner. Given, so you would expect that when country makes this decision, it should be based on scientific findings. Are we beginning to see this is just the 6th case recorded in Nigeria, and in our own case, all of the people that we have seen have travel history in November with South Africa. So it wasn't something that emanated from this place. Largely, who knows, it even came from Europe to South Africa. So what is the justification for throwing us into that list and disrupting supply chain or even free movement? Conferences, it's December, for God's sake. There's so much travel between both sides. So the argument is fair. But on the other side, like we say, there is a because. We understand it.
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, because of time, we would have to end the review here.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for coming, even though we're still going to retain you on the program as well.
Thank you.
Yes, for the segment. Thank you so much. All right. Now, let's go on a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll be taking a look at other issues on the front burner today. Please stay with us.
latest updates on current topical issues and breaking news by downloading the Trust TV mobile app on your Android devices. Go online, click Google Play Store, search Trust TV, install the app, and get doses of unfiltered information on happenings all over the world in your pocket. Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
All right, thank you for staying with us. And if you're just joining, you're watching Daybreak, reaching you live from the nation's capital. We just had our review, and now moving into the next discussion on the program. And now we're discussing a syndrome that emanates for the journalism profession in Nigeria, talking about brown envelope. Now, brown envelope syndrome has remained a controversial issue in any debate centered on the Nigerian press, media professionalism, and media ethics. Now, it is one of the major setbacks of media growth in Nigeria. Is a system whereby journalists collect money or other material gifts from news sources, company executives or event organizers to cover such events and probably give it the wildest publicity as the case may be. Now, public commentators have argued that media practice and the enforcement of the various ethical codes that preach professionalism are the practical ways to ensure ethical conduct and behavior amongst journalists and other categories of media practitioners, especially in Nigeria, where these are missing. Before we go into the conversation proper, let's take a look at a report from our correspondent Idris Jibrin from Kano, who had a little chit-chat with a cross-section of journalists from Kano. Please take a look.
Well, the issue of brown envelope syndrome is one of the legal or ethical issues, if I can say, that affects journalism practice, particularly in Nigeria. You see, when you collect something from your source, there is actually the tendency that you will have to go towards the attention of or towards the interest of the person who is giving you that brown envelope. As they used to say, who pays the piper usually dictates the tune. So it's actually a case of you collected something from your source, so you have to, tilt the attention or tilt the interest, the focus of your story towards that person's interest. It might actually be against the public interest. So it's actually affecting journalism practice in Nigeria, and the issue of credibility is also put at stake.
Journalism is a profession that requires one or a journalist to be honest, objective, very fair. So whenever you collect something as an incentive or what you call brown envelope, then you are likely to submit to the, let me say, what the other person wants you to do. Because there is no way somebody will give you money or will give you something, or they call it gratification, just out of nothing. Definitely there must be an interest he wants you to serve or he wants you to promote. And one thing about brown envelope is that even if somebody gives it out to you without actually telling you to do something in particular, that means the person, there is likelihood that the person has tendency in influencing your own opinion or influencing your own editorial judgment, whether in the news he wants you to cover or maybe in the near future. Because definitely when you go to cover an event and then you come back, or the person give you maybe what they call a brown envelope containing money or something else or different, it doesn't necessarily has to be monetary in terms. It can be maybe somebody send you a recharge card, or he gives you maybe a package, something. It's a brown envelope because he gives you that thing out of nothing, just for you, maybe because of the services you offer to him. So definitely that is going to influence your own judgment.
The issue of brown envelope has been or is always affecting the practice of journalism in the country. It has done a lot of damages to the profession. In fact, it has led to so many issues that were not meant to happen. What I mean by this is, in a situation whereby a journalist will be given just a token in order to kill a story or to hide something that the public needs to know. This is something very serious that need to be addressed. So therefore, the act of brown envelope has really goes against the ethics of journalism. The laws of journalism has bars journalists from correcting anything. So I think it has caused a lot of damage, and if it is not addressed, it will cause a lot of harms to the profession.
Yeah. Well, you heard it from the horse's mouth. Uncovering what has been covered up, nailing down the truth that has been hidden, has actually been threatened by the issue of this brown envelope syndrome. And like all what the journalists are saying, the tendency is the fact that whenever you collect something from someone, he is definitely expecting something in return, which affects the credibility of the story and even the sources that gives you the story, and even the credibility of the media organization that broadcasts such particular story. Therefore, most journalists are of the view that something needs to be done as urgent as possible by the regulators to ensure that the issue of brown envelope syndrome is regulated or actually completely eradicated in terms when it comes to the issue of journalism practice across the country.
Idris Jibrin there from Kano, giving us, this report about brown envelope. Now we have in the studio to give us, perspectives on this and to talk about this, I would say syndrome in the studio. We have Ali M. Ali, Editor-in-Chief, People's Daily, and Deputy President, Nigeria Guild of Editors. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. It's good to be here again.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
And then, of course, we already had the Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust, Sunday Michael, in the studio. He will also be giving us thoughts around this topic as we discuss. Now, let's begin with, the assessment of the media in Nigeria, the practice of media in Nigeria, as an institution and the role that they play.
Well, it has been commendable. Media, the involvement of media and the evolution of this republic and indeed previous republic. In the fight against colonialism, that is pre-independent Nigeria, the role played by the media, post-independent Nigeria, military Nigeria, and of course democratic Nigeria. In all these periods, you know, intermittently divided by military incursion into the political arena, you see the role the media has played has been very commendable in fighting, for instance, for self-rule, independence in 1960, and then for fighting for democracy. In all this, the media has done admirably well. But under democratic rule, and in all this, you see also media content, media development is reflective of the divergence in the nature of Nigerian state, how the Nigerian state evolved from the three regions at independence, northeast, western, eastern, and northern region. So you see that even the media practice is reflective of these differences. You see how the media evolved in each of these divergent regions. It's reflective of also the character of these regions. How do I mean? If you look at the nature of colonial penetration vis-a-vis north-south, how the colonial master came to Nigeria, his involvement in southern Nigeria was different from how he was involved in northern Nigeria. In southern Nigeria, it was direct rule, you know, but in northern Nigeria, it was indirect rule. And because of these differences, also how the Nigerian media itself evolved. You see, the Nigerian media evolved from the days of Iwohin in the 18th century, 19th century, how it's then evolved, metamorphosed into, well, the Daily Times at the turn of the 19th century, later on private concern like the Tribune, the Nigerian Tribune, which I think came into business in 1949 or thereabout. Then you compare it with the northern region. The northern region until 1939, when Gaskia Tafi Kobo began business, you know, and then later on by 1966, we had the new Nigeria. Otherwise, you will see most newspapers, if you're talking of the media, specifically the press, you see the press was domiciled mainly in the southern part of the country. And now for certain reasons, the exposure to Western education maybe came a little earlier in the southern part of the country. Mark you, I say Western education. Eastern education, as you know, mostly came through the northern part of the country. But you see, there is a remarkable media consumption pattern, a difference in media consumption. In the northern part of the country, because we are mainly a radio society, we listen more to the radio than we read newspapers. But that's not saying that we are not literate, but because there are other genera of the press in the northern part of the country. For example, the Ajami, the Hausa Tafiko, which is written in vernacular. You know, you have to be literate to also read newspapers, unlike the radio or even the television much later, because the television came to Western Nigeria in 1959, the first on the continent. You know, long before any other African nation state evolved the television was in Nigeria. In 1959, the Western region established the Western television of, you know, yes. So, yes.
Okay, now let's talk about the brown envelope syndrome. Now, is it a common practice in, Nigerian media practice? Is it a common occurrence in Nigerian media practice? If yes, how has that affected, the media practice in the country?
Common practice, yes. To what extent it becomes a question of evaluation. But the effect on the Nigerian media, it's enormous. It is difficult for you to have taken a gift from anybody of any kind and expect to still remain neutral with regards to how you tell the story about about that person. There is always this innate attribute to want to protect whoever gives you a gift, you know, and so that is where the compromise becomes very evident. And so that is something that has really impacted the quality and even the trust of information emanating from the media to the public. And so every time you pick a story today, as my senior colleague will tell you, one of the first evaluation you want to make is what interest is this writer protecting? And the interests are obvious from how the news article is presented, especially if you're one who is knowledgeable with the issues behind the background. And you start asking very valid questions about why certain voices are silent, why is it not giving proportionate attentions to all sides of the story? Why does it seem to be emphasizing something more than the other? And by the time you begin to see this kind of imbalance in the reporting, then it showed clearly that some kind of transactions would have taken place behind the scene. And it's a major issue, and so sometimes we tend to look at it just at the level of what is exchanged between the reporter and whoever or whatever event he has gone to cover. It has taken on very complex forms. So these days the reporter is also sitting and taking instruction from an editor who perhaps may have carried out this kind of transaction and directs you to a particular news scene and what to even look out for, rather than allow you to use your own judgment as a reporter to extract what you think will be of value to your readers and all of that. So yes, indeed, to answer your question straightforward, it has had enormous impact in news reporting in Nigeria.
So now let me direct this to Madam Ali. How did the Nigerian media get to this point? Does it have some kind of historical linkage, you know, in the way in which the media evolved? And then, you know, now we are now talking about brown envelope, which, you know, apparently contradicts the principles of journalism. So how did we get here?
Well, I would say a number of reasons, because which goes back to this lingering question, the media itself. Is it a business or social service? Unless you all agree there is a consensus whether the media is a business or involves in rendering social service, then perhaps you want to then isolate the specific reason why the media, people will seek to influence the media, especially the reporter. Either way, the media would be influenced by so many factors. There is a proprietorial factor, there is advertorial factor, there is political factor. These are all the influences. There is a legal factor there also. But narrowing it down to how did we get here? Well, I would say from the moment that media is seen as a business, and the pressure on media owners, on media practitioners, and then the demand for all publicity at whatever cost, or the urge to be there first by competition, by the competition. The competition could be corporate, could be political, could be even material, you know. Then what do? Often at times, I have seen instances where people who would rather say, look, we know we will not be fairly represented in the media. Our interests may not be fairly represented because the media owners may not listen to us. But let's see how we can get hold of the media practitioners, the gatekeepers, the news hunts. So all this coming together. And then the fact that we all know, the media industry worldwide, and especially in third world countries, and narrowing down to our own professional milieu environment, then you know the media practitioner is not adequately catered for. We have media houses that don't pay salaries. For example, I'm just giving you a very micro example, in addition to other interests. Now, and then even the nature of media ownership. The media is ideologically driven? For instance, what kind of media are we talking about? There are media houses or media institutions that they are ideologically driven. Well, but then the market forces would determine whether they thrive or they go under. And all this open them to corruption, to compromise. And like I said earlier, the corruption, what we see as brown envelope is actually more or less an insignificant part. He briefly touched on the idea that the reporter himself may be a pawn, actually, used by bigger forces.
Parties,
yes. And then how even free are even editors and gatekeepers from proprietorial control and enterprise.
Ownership and control.
Ownership and control. And even the owners, how free are they from political pressure? So all these things, depending at what level, they have influence on the final product, on how stories are even placed, what pages are the stories, what prominence they are given, and in balancing, even if something that is controversial. I've seen that happening all the time. So these are all manifestation of the syndrome you're talking about. Yes. So, but in the final analysis, you see, unless we define this, the media, what is it? Is it a business? If it's a business, it has to be self-sustaining. You have to survive first. I've seen newspapers, media organizations that have gone under because they came in strong on ideology. They're ideologically based. Fine and good, unless you have heavy funding somewhere. And then there are certain parameters which you cannot go outside of. You're bound to go under. But if it's a business also, you also have to all the time navigate, because it's a competition. You have to navigate to understand the market, how you're going to make sure that you don't offend certain advertorial interests.
Okay, so from what your analysis here is, there's a combination of two factors here. Either you are a business or you are a social service.
Yeah.
Is there a meeting point anywhere, between these two variables? And is it possible to have a balance, some kind of, a line in between somewhere?
Striving to find that balance, has been the struggle for us in recent times. And there is no denying the fact that these forces have come to stay. And each of these forces understand how much influence they have on the media, and they are maximizing it. You need the money to keep operating. We incidentally do not have a funding structure similar to what we have, for instance, in England, where the BBC is funded by taxes, devoid of what the government wants to do or not. And that funding is guaranteed, because as long as you have a television in your house, you must pay a TV tax that goes to the funding of the BBC. So it has, if you like, a first-line charge with regards to how funding's coming. To a large extent, they can call the bluff of a number of corporates or even government institutions. You can see that even in the issues that are reviewed in the media, because they do that without fear or favor, because the funding would always be there. Until we begin to get, in the US, we are beginning to see a different kind of system evolve. We are beginning to see them create followership that are willing to donate money for credible journalism. That selling papers, for instance, in Nigeria is a problem of its own, let alone get people to donate so much. Because, in fact, a few of some of the enterprising work we have seen in the media are funded by interest from outside this country. And that also is another kind of influence, if you like. So that meeting point is critical. Is blood. It's not completely fine. You are neither here nor there. What the struggle for people like Mala Ali always is to find a bit of balance between here and there. We know the issues affect you as a corporate advertiser with us, but these issues we cannot ignore. So the question would really be, what's your explanation? How do we bring your voice in to explain your own side of the issue? And so it's a massive struggle, because as far as some of these forces are concerned, there are no-go areas for them. If you tamper or if you even delve into those areas, you are starting a war that will take you a long time to reconcile. So it's a moving average. Today you are here, tomorrow you are there. You just continue. It's a scale that is sitting on equal footings. And what you do is, once the weight bends to a side, you try to create a balance on the other side, just to keep the pendulum alive and all of that. So it's a challenge that if you like, from a personal evaluation, a number of media have done very well to manage, and we will continue to struggle with until, like you said, we get to a point where we can answer the question of whether it is a business or a social service.
Okay, I think Malam Ali should still answer the same question if he has, because it seems like he has something to say.
Well, sure. You know, it's an open-ended kind of thing. You can go on and on, give example from other climes. Like he did mention the BBC. BBC, to me, remains a classic example of how you should have a media that will be devoid of these influences of itemized. But exactly, if you take the counterpart of the BBC, for example, well, by any stretch of the imagination, they are not on the same pedestal. If you take the VOA, for example, the VOA is directly funded by the Department of State, and which is reflective. Most of the content you find in the news in the VOA are actually American understanding of global issues or even local issues. And VOA, because it broadcasts to an external audience, is also mindful of its own political interest. So there is no way you can, for example, compare the BBC and the VOA. At a point, for example, the BBC, even by the British, by the government, is seen, especially in moments of conflict. The BBC, in trying to be neutral, has perhaps stepped on so many toes. In the run-up to the Gulf War I or II, in 1991 and years later in 2003, the American coalition thought of actually incinerating the BBC because as far as they were concerned, it was Baghdad Broadcasting Corporation. And back home here in our own clime, we've seen newspapers or media houses that certain interests perceive that their contents are inimical to them or they are not fairly represented. And this point is more glaring if you look at the nature of media practice vis-a-vis North-South. Like I said from the onset of this discussion, this discourse, there is a remarkable difference. The evolution of people like to call them Lagos-Ibadan axis of the press is totally different from the evolution of the media in the North, Kaduna, Kano, and now Abuja axis. You see there is a remarkable difference. To this moment, the media practice from the Lagos-Ibadan axis is very combative, and more often than not, and I'm saying this without any, that is combative and sometimes is even propagandist. You find a situation where the media also from this part of the country is trying to deflect this misnomer because it's no normal. Sometimes you see you condemn some group for whatever reasons, not giving them fair hearing, stereotyping them, if you like. And then you find that the media domicile in the northern part of the country trying to also counter this misleading narrative which has happened over the years. To this moment, there is this dichotomy between the Lagos-Ibadan axis of the press and the Kano-Kaduna axis of the press, which mainly, I regret, mainly as opposed to the Lagos-Ibadan axis of the press, privately owned. The Lagos and the Kano-Kaduna and now Abuja axis of the press until the dawn of maybe a medium like this. Okay. It has been largely government control.
All right. So how important, given the role that the media plays in a society, how important is this media platforms in, shaping narratives in Nigeria? That's one leg of the question. And then how can we foster professionalism? Now, regardless of all of these factors, that influence the practice of media in Nigeria, which I believe the crux of it is the issue of funding. However, there is some level of professionalism that is supposed to be upheld. How can we uphold this, professionalism, going by the ethics, of the profession and all of that, given the fact that it has great impact, in the country?
Well, I think first, media entrepreneurs will not like this. What I mean is, first, the media entrepreneurs themselves, they have to be very professionals. More often than not, media entrepreneurs are actually businessmen. They are mainly driven by profit. So in the recruitment process, on those who would man from news hunts to gatekeepers, more often than not, they don't look for thoroughbred professionals. They're looking for shortcuts. People who would do their bidding. You understand? Who would do their bidding at any. So first, if I had my way, media owners should be also media professionals, not just entrepreneurs who would just invest money and then go to sleep and then watch how that money would multiply in no time. I'll give you an example. When Abiola set up the Concord, and before him, the Guardian, the Ibru, when Abiola set up the Concord, being a businessman, he said, look, these are the boundaries. Don't attack my business. Don't attack polygamy. I'm polygamous. Don't attack Islam, is my religion. Any other thing you can go. So now it was up to the management and the editors to navigate, because this is the parameter, don't go outside this. So first, going back to what do we do to ensure professionalism? And I must say, I've seen that happening, especially with the media trust. Media trust, I'm just being specific here, in the recruitment and in the management. And then I've seen it happen. We're talking of professionalism now. I'm not talking about the content. You understand? We've seen that with Punch newspapers. When you look at the reward system, the training and retraining, and those who are capable of being trained, not people set in their ways. There are people who are really set in their ways. You cannot modify or impact or precisely, you understand. So first, from the recruitment and the training and retraining, as much as possible, not having favored ones. Let merit and hard work, enterprise within these parameters, then perhaps we can have that. Even that we have occasional slips, where sometimes inadvertently, for whatever reason you have occasional slips, some piece of news item may find its way into the print or onto the air. And then before you know it, there will be a lot of pandemonium and even possibly conflagration. But you see, unfortunately, the dawn of the digital media, the social media, has also changed the dynamics, regrettably, because there is this pressure now to be first with the news, to break the news. So invariably, it will affect gatekeeping, it will affect, it's not even it will, it's affecting professionalism, it's affecting gatekeeping. So, but yes, it's important that from top management to the lawyers and the lowest, to the news hunt, you have professionals who are given training and retraining from time to time to keep abreast with contemporary development.
Okay, Mr. Michael, what about professional bodies? What is their role in all of this?
You know, one of the things the media have strongly warded off from time immemorial is external influence in determining what in getting in the way of its content. But what the media has been doing lately, including Daily Trust where I work, is the introduction of an ombudsman. It's a way of self-rightening, you know, that basic training that we got in journalism school, of somebody who sits within, who looks like he sits from within the system but is isolated from the gatekeeping decisions on a daily basis, but take all of this content, do a content analysis, and begin to show you how, for instance, reporters seem to have concentrated, say, more on politics rather than report real issues, how we are beginning to become elitists in our reporting and alienating people whose voices should also be captured, how we seem to be paying attention to one sector to the detriment of the other, or one side of the country to the detriment of the other, how, you know, because we do these things, like he said, inadvertently, sometimes unconsciously, and we get away with them. But if somebody sits back, does these deliberate evaluations and bring the outcomes to your knowledge, that you can begin to make deliberate efforts to balance out what these things are. But until you stop to make evaluations, you would not understand how far off you are veered off from what is supposed to be a standard practice. So that's one way some media houses are addressing this. The role of professionals, if you like what the Guild of Editors and all others that we have in the country, is the occasional training and retraining and conferences they hold where critical subjects are discussed, where they even take evaluations from people outside the media on how the content of the media is perceived, on how the media is failing in beaming satellites on certain aspects of society, or how reportage can be improved, and they internalize some of these things and return to the newsroom and find deliberate ways or strategies to begin to inculcate these things in their reporters, or even during editorial meetings. And some of the ways we have seen some of these things, like you said, is when you have a divergent newsroom. Have people from all shades of opinion come into your editorial meeting seat, and just when you think you know it all, or you're taking a passage, somebody punctures that argument and open your eye to some other areas of the discourse that you had really not paid attention to.
Madam Ali can answer some questions.
Yes. I just want to also add to the issue. We have bodies like the NUJ, the NUJ, the Guild of Editors, the body in which you represent, I would say, in this instance. Beyond the conferences, is there any thought around maybe some kind of enforcement of principles of practice, like ethical practices and all of that? Maybe some kind of guidelines, for the body, for journalists, for media platforms, to abide by. Because if you look at, say, for instance, the NBA, and the ICANN, for instance, these are professional bodies, and they try to ensure some kind of sanity, in the practice of journalism. But in this instance, sometimes we see even the NUJs, for instance, are the ones, that are more political. The media is supposed to be apolitical, but in some instances you find, these bodies being more political, engaging in certain practices, in fact, like giving of awards to persons, and all of that. And one raises the question of, how do you hold accountable these people that you are supposed to, always, spotlight, when you, give awards, and all of that are unmerited, by the way?
Well, the thing, that is the paradox of the Nigerian state. A while ago, we talked about whether the media is business or social service. And then take it to the media or journalist or media itself. Is it a profession? You listed the Nigerian Bar Association, NBA. Well, Institute of Chartered Accountants, is that the example you give? But then let me just restrict myself to the Nigerian Bar Association and the Nigerian Medical Association, professional bodies. If you are not certified by either of them, you can't practice, which should be so. But is the media a profession? Is it a profession? Because we've seen instances, people confuse writers as journalists. People who write beautiful pieces, flawless. Are they journalists or are they mere opinion writers? I've seen instances, issues of ethics now, whether the idea of giving awards. You find instances, people you condemn, people with known cases of corruption or fraud are being celebrated by the media, and people falling all over themselves to get recognition by such media. Themselves, the media organization themselves, their proprietors are suspect. What I mean by suspect, some of them are politically exposed people, but they are media owners. And then they have corruption cases hanging over their heads. Elsewhere, they shouldn't be anywhere close to owning media. But then they are the ones giving awards, and people willingly are accepting. Now, the question of whether the media should be political or media practitioners should be political, I think they should be media practitioners. But you see, what I mean, being political doesn't mean they should be subjective. You should have strong political opinion. I have very strong political opinion. But it doesn't mean that I should be also very subjective. In media practice, you as the gatekeeper, as a news horn, as much as possible, part of the training is that you rise above your base emotions, your base sentiments. You reflect as much as you can the truth, your understanding. For example, people all the time, if they want an opinion in the media domain, they call for press conferences. They reel out figures. They reel out statistics, but it's for you to cross-check some of these statistics that we left. Or as part of my federal constituency, blah, blah, blah. I have done this, I've done that. Cross-check. Don't go to town with a loop-sided, as far as I'm concerned, story. Do you match that? There is even a disparity between the theory and the practice. Ideally, this should be the way. In the United States, for instance, if somebody calls for a press conference, there is no guarantees that it will be reflected the following morning or that later in the day. It has to be cross-checked. It's just a one-sided story. You are just telling us we have to do that. But how often do we do that? Now, if you look at the Nigerian Press Organization, which is an umbrella body for the Nigerian Guild of Editors, Nigerian Union of Journalists, and I think Broadcasting Organization of Nigeria. One of the things which I say one or two newspapers have done admirably well in not giving awards, but you have to generate money. And this media organization, like the Trust, which has blazed the trail, Trust Punch, and I think The Guardian, even People's Media, for example, we've not done that. We've never done that in the 12 or 13 years of being. But I have seen instances where we've taken measures as Chief Operating Officer of the media, fired an erring reporter for misconduct, closely linked to this syndrome we're talking about. The next day he sauntered into another newspaper and he was employed. Later on he became the executive of that newspaper. Wow. And then we go to MPA meeting. Well, of course, he remained in the shadows. Then he's there in the front row seat. How do you reconcile that? And then you have awards given, for example, you have the National Association of Political Reporters. You have, not even the NUJ now, you have Beat Association giving awards. So all this...
Say the National Assembly Corps, for instance.
Exactly. And then they've constituted themselves. I know certain media organizations, they've kicked against that. They don't want their reporters. In the People's Media, we discourage that. And I'm sure, I think even in a media trust, that is discouraged. You don't belong to any beat association. But you see, how is the reward system? Are reporters and other gatekeepers, news hunt gatekeepers, are they properly compensated? When this very beautiful newspaper came into business, it was paying journalists, editors like the bank, Next. But Next was strong in ideology, was very strong, and it looked at all sides of the story. Excellent editorial content, marvelous, flawless. But Next did not survive. Why? Because there was no advert. It offended those who are potential advertisers.
And that brings me to the issue of funding for the media.
Yes.
If it is to be a social service, because I mean, we have to define at what point does the public service take precedence? At what point does it take dominance? At what point do we say, okay, this is in the interest of the public and we have to stick to this, no matter what it costs us? So I have seen also the practice in some other platforms where there is an appeal fund, kind of, for members of the public to fund the media. That way they can be able to function, objectively, and with at least with a very minimum level of influence. Do you think that we should begin to maybe think around that direction?
Well, yeah. Well, for the Nigerian state, because like I say, it's a paradox, really. And I think maybe, yes, ideally that's the way to go. And that's why we have OKs, like I think he mentioned in the course of this conversation, that some of the remarkable news stories broken by such media organization is the support is received from maybe foundations, most of them from abroad, thorough investigative journalism, because it needs funding. Yes, but how many people today have disposable income today? And how many are even aware that responsible, thoroughly independent journalism can help to shape society for the better? And then the question even is, are we agreed that if the media is social service, are we all agreed? It's just like people ask this question. Maybe by any stretch of the imagination may not be the same, but I'm just trying to see how people, to this moment, Nigerians are not agreed what is the national interest. How much more the media? What is in national interest? People, what is the national interest now? For example, people are questioning, and that's why some people, they say, even Nigeria's unity can be negotiated because we've not defined what is the national interest. You know, till this moment, Nigeria's corporate existence is being, as a single entity is being questioned. So the media itself, at what point what is of public interest or public good? All the time we mark that.
Yeah, the Constitution talks about holding government accountable.
Exactly.
To the people.
Exactly.
So
Section 222, 22, I think.
Yes. So shouldn't be some sort of guiding,
yes,
principle. Maybe I should take Sunday here.
It should, but in what context? And so you cannot ignore all of the issues around ownership, for instance. It's something that we should also begin to deliberately look at in this country, the media structuring and media ownership. Not because you have to move from one end to the other dramatically, as in the case of moving from the ideology of social service to a business dramatically, but it can help to diffuse some of this tensions. And so if you have a media that is properly structured, with people taking up shares and getting board positions in those media, then somebody will be asking questions about directions, about charting deliberate strategy or philosophy or ideology for the media. The issues we have with ownership largely here is because it is usually about one man or two persons who are politically exposed, and everything tilts towards that direction. It's a difficult compromise for the editor. As much as you want to be neutral, as much as you want to pursue a public cause, as long as those issues contradict the interests of the owners, then there are limits to which you can drive. So I think it's about time we begin to, from the point of view of governance, rethink media structures. If we try to hold public enterprise and even corporate Nigeria to account with regards to structuring and corporate governance, I think it is also time we begin to rethink corporate governance in the newsroom.
Okay. All right, we'll definitely continue this conversation, but before then, let's take a quick break. You're still watching Daybreak on Trust TV, and we're discussing brown envelope syndrome and ethics of journalism. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. We're still discussing, brown envelope syndrome and ethics of journalism on Daybreak right here on Trust TV. And, there's this question that that has been in my head for quite a while. Malam Ali, he actually talked about journalism being about survival in Nigeria and then most journalists not being paid well. But you'd agree with me that we actually have bosses who will justify the non-payment, by saying they've given you a platform to, make as much money as you can. How do you expect, such journalists to survive without, the brown envelope?
You see, that is also reflective of the mindset of media owners and the Nigerian, well, if you like, the Nigerian milice is a Nigerian thing. We've had, it's not different than having the armed policeman on a checkpoint whose salary has not been paid or who is grossly underpaid. But you see, unless you know why you are in the media, if you want to make money, don't come to the media. Don't come to the media. Media is a place, one of the most respected figures gone now in the United States, who brokered the peace between the Israeli and the Arab, Walter Cronkite, a broadcast of repute. He's late now. Walter, he was at a point considered to run for the presidency of the United States. He said, no, I'm a journalist. My own is to help resolve conflict using my own influence, my star power. How many media people do that now? We have media people who still have enormous influence, but then they turn it into, precisely, they merchandise it. We've had instances now. We must make that distinction now. Now, so it's wrong, it's unethical, and someone who takes that with the idea that eventually they're going to use that platform to make money. He's not going to bring in the story he will bring in stories that are actually paid for, and then he'll go to any length. I recall in my formative years in journalism as a news hunt, as one of the gatekeepers years ago, about 30 years ago, a reporter brought a story to me. This happened in 1993. And then he used certain appellation to describe the news source. And clearly, you could see even from the intro that something must have exchanged hands. It smelled and reeked of corruption. And that story never saw the light of the day. And of course, you'll be tagged enemy of progress, you'll be tagged whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is wrong, it's unethical to say, look, I've given you gun, you slave. Both of you will be working for interest, certainly not in public interest. You'll be working for your own interest. But regrettably, such media practitioners are exerting unequal influence on the Nigerian state because they understand the Nigerian psychology. I've worked in the newspaper that every now and again, every year it will give a award or it will rate banks. Every year it will say, okay, this year we're going to rate the strongest banks. I don't know the parameters. You don't know the parameters that, or you don't even know the parameters that these awards are given. There's still a controversial one. Let me slightly digress here to show you what the Nigerian Guild of Editors under our leadership is trying to do differently. One of which, recently we had our first post-election conference, annual All Nigerian Editors Conference. And in that conference, we said editors should self-sponsor. Normally, we go to state governments, they will host, they will take a large chunk of, responsibility of it. They will determine the date, and sometimes even beyond that. And then, of course, he who pays the tax, you dare not. Then we decided at the ESCO level, at the Executive Council level, that, look, let's break away from tradition. Let's ask editors to come, pay their way like the Nigerian Bar, members of the Nigerian Bar Association do, Chartered Institute of Accountants, or what they do when they have their annual conferences. But let's have some kind of partnership. But what happened? Most editors, most welcome it, but some kicked because they can't see themselves
paying their way.
Yeah, to socialize, to also the whole essence of having an annual conference beyond the theme. Beyond the new skills, new knowledge that you may come across. Also, you need to fraternize with your colleagues. But some don't see that. They see that, look, they are going to be taxed. But it's understandable because editors and media practitioners, they are easily the most underpaid or not even paid at all set of professionals. They are left to their own devices, just like the Nigerian police. And if you like, maybe if you go to other sectors, professional sector, you may find that prevalent there. If you go to the courts, for example, or you go to the judiciary, I'm not saying that, I'm saying likely, because if the Nigerian police is anything to go by, we've had instances where the Nigerian police, this is in the public domain, I'm not making this up, it's an allegation, that look, they don't have money to fuel their vehicles. They get returns from checkpoints, from money extorted from either motorists or helpless citizens, which they make return to the divisional police officer, who in turn makes it to the commissioner of police, who in turn makes it to the IG. This has been said in the public domain over the years. So now, if you have a journalist with a platform, the media is very important. And that's why in the media, they say, back in the day, that if you don't want it seen in the print tomorrow, don't do it today. And again, that a professional, whoever, a medical doctor can bury his mistakes and nobody will notice. But the media man cannot bury his mistake. If he makes a mistake, if the media makes a mistake now, give it a few hours, especially now, and it will be out in the public. How often do we see medical doctors commit grievous errors, but it's not discovered immediately?
All right, now as a way of rounding off, this discussion, there's also another debate about media regulation. From all that we have said, it's apparent that there is need for some kind of regulation, either self-regulation or by government or whatever form. But in terms of regulation, what should we be looking at? Structural regulation, which is very, very apparent from what we have said, or should we look at also content regulation, which that one I'm sure it's very, very debatable and arguable and all of that. But what is sacrosanct is there is need for some form of regulation. What should we be looking at, doing?
Who should regulate the media? Government or the media itself? A while ago, my co-discussant here, which is agreed, we all agreed at the Nigerian Press Organization level, that is, which, like I said, involved is the umbrella body of the NUJ, Nigerian Guild of Editors, Broadcasting Organization of Nigeria, Newspaper Supervisors Association of Nigeria. These are the groups that form the Nigerian Press Organization, one of which is to have the ombudsman and any newspaper, and for that matter, any media. It could be electronic, it could be digital, unless you have an ombudsman who would be detached, part of it, but then detached, and then who will make, and the ombudsman is someone that is really informed, familiar with the nuances of the media. That is one way to self-regulate, and it's important. But if you allow government, which I'm totally averse, there are sufficient laws, existing law in the statute books.
So but in terms of structure, don't you think that there is need for some kind of laws, by government, and there should be some kind of enforcement? For instance, what determines how, for instance, we are talking about brown envelope. So what are the parameters or what are the criteria, for someone to establish a media organization? Because some of them you find that a media organization is set up in the next 3 months, 6 months, it cannot pay salaries. And so reporters are subjected, have no option not to go to, for brown envelopes and all of that. So, but again, we also understand that in some climes, you don't do that. There are criteria, before you can set up a media organization to say you want to do that. So shouldn't we be having those kind of regulations?
If I may, from my knowledge, these regulations exist. The Corporate Affairs Commission, for instance, has set standards for what is a corporate entity. The laws are there. The question is whether they have been followed. So everybody knows what is required of a corporate structure. For proper corporate governance, for you to have a board separate from the management, and for you to have diversity in the board, and what amount of controlling shares a single person should have. The whole idea is to bring balance to conversation or to perspective, and to not have one dominant perspective over the others. This corporate governance code are reviewed time to time. Today we are seeing more argument for the number of women that should constitute a board, so that it begins to reflect issues that are gender-based around wherever management conversations are happening. So the laws are there. It's about implementation and supervision. And so it is not out of place to ask questions about, or to even write to media houses and say, we expect you to do ABC and XYZ in line with the Corporate Governance Code or in line with Corporate Affairs Commission's operating standards, and to allow the media houses to cover up those tracks. The other thing I want to point to is media practitioners themselves standing up for themselves. One of the things we have seen in practice lately is it's easy for us to fight for the rights of other people than we tend to do for ourselves. Why should you endure a 10-month, 11-month, 15-month, 3 years in an organization that is not paying you, and you continue to show up every day at work? What is the moral justification to show up? The courts are also there. This number of staffs that have been so treated, what is wrong with taking a class action and suing these institutions and demanding for what is rightly yours? You can approach the industrial courts or approach any court in the land, for instance, or even use some of these professional bodies as the basis to approach these institutions and demand that people should be treated properly. So we need to begin to see those kind of actions, because that is what we see. We have seen people in global media houses walk out of the media houses because they notice that the media house is drifting from the ideology that attracted them to work in those organizations in the first place. So ideology on the part of the media, your ideology as a person, to stand by certain principles and ensure that you do not operate below those principles, because the moment you accept to function below those principles, then you would have to compromise to remain relevant. And so if you think to get to that level and your name is very important to you and you cannot afford that, then you take a walk or do what is needful using the instrumentalities of the law.
All right, now just before we wrap up, there's this saying that goes, for you to be able to stop something, you need to know where it started. Now, in your opinion, where did corruption in journalism start? Is it pressure from business or political elites, or is it the journalists themselves? And do you see an end to, the brown envelope syndrome in Nigeria?
Malam Ali has taken us through a journey of evolution, and in that journey you can begin to pick at places where we had holes, that resulted in the monster that we have in the room today, starting from media ownership. And so most people came into to own media platforms to drive a particular agenda. He gave an instance of others who came in and said, these are no-go areas. You could do everything else with other places. Every time that you have this kind of shortfall, it just basically creates room for people to invent whatever it is. It's a way of survival for them. So it has been for a long time coming, whether you are talking about structuring or you are talking about the issues of non-remuneration of journalists, or even the interests that are behind these institutions, or even today, as we have come to see, the corporate influence on newspaper content, the advertising influence on newspaper companies. All of these are one form of corruption or the other. And then even in the gatekeeping, you depending on who is sitting there today, and with all the influences that he has built over time rising through his journalism career, there are institutions that are no-go areas for his reporters, and there are others he is very glad to apply all of the ethical requirements. So these are all of the issues. It's not easy to tackle them in one full sweep, but if the standards are there, if you have proper corporate governance, proper structuring, then you can begin to question some of this practice. Sometimes in retrospect, not necessarily arresting them when they are happening, but when they are done, somebody should be able to evaluate these things, as we have said with the Ombudsman, to say, as far as this story or this content is concerned, we have not done the needful, and somebody has to be responsible for this. And so once those kind of accountability begin to take place, people will begin to make the conscious effort to try and apply the ethics of the profession to be balanced, to be fair, to give voice to every party in this institution, and try not to manifest so much, so obvious, like he has mentioned some of your own biases in the story.
Okay.
Madam Ali,
Yes.
let's have your final. Final say.
Well, you see, the thing is, the Nigerian media, unfortunately, a section of it is averse to audit.
True.
It's averse to the idea of accountability. It has appropriated itself the powers of the lords of the manor. So they are not, and then unfortunately, this section of the media also, you'll be amazed that most of it is so unprofessional. I've seen instances where it has relied on social media content to go to town. And I've seen instances where, but for, I would say, the Nigerian miracle, the whole country will have been up in flames. So unless that section of the Nigerian media subject itself to audit from time to time, have its own ombudsman, to have occasional ruthless self-analysis, we are in for a very...
But is that self-analysis ever going to happen? Someone has to do it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you see, well, this is going totally different. I mean, because in certain communication theories, you understand that people who consume media products are not totally undiscerning. With time, they will begin to look elsewhere. You'll be concerned, if you're a television, you'll be concerned about rating. And that's why there is a difference between people say television or radio outlets that are concerned about ratings. Because they are not really media. They are not concerned with news. They are concerned about rating. And rating is, is totally different from being hardcore news medium. So with time, people will begin to, they say, if you mention them by name, they say no. And that's why when Trust TV came into business, some of us addicted to morning shows, we say, yeah, maybe perhaps the standard the Daily Trust has set in the newspaper, perhaps it will be replicated in the television. So yes, unless this section regulates itself, the ombudsman takes, otherwise they're going to lose followership and viewership.
And ultimately relevance.
Revenue and relevance.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
You for having you on the program. Yes, hopefully join us again for another time on the program. All right, we've been speaking with Malam Ali M. Ali. He is the editor-in-chief, People's Daily, and also Deputy President, Nigeria Guild of Editors. And also, we had Deputy Business Editor, Daily Trust newspaper, Sunday Michael, in the studio to talk about this. And now with that, we'll wrap up the show. We thank you for watching. Join us again tomorrow for another time on the program. I am Ayuba Ilya.
And I'm Dashan Husseina Usman. Have a good day.